Buenas tardes. Thank you all for being here today. Um, it is a true honor for me to be with the Chicago Humanities Festival today. And to be honest, I was quite surprised when I got the invitation because obviously, the theme this year is about citizens, and I am anything but a citizen. So I was really surprised, but then I realized that what they wanted from me was to be able to, come here and have a conversation with you about what it means not to be a citizen, not to enjoy the guarantees and protections of citizenship. So that's what I'm here to do today. I am not an immigration expert. I am not an expert on any field. I'm an expert at being an undocumented immigrant. I'm pretty good at it. Been doing it for about, 22, 23 years, so got some practice on that. My life in the shadows began some 17 years ago. It was a hot April night in Tijuana. That border siren that lures both migrant and tourist with promises of boundless prosperity and unchecked lust. That night, I joined a numerous army, an anonymous army, under the infinite depth of night, and guided by a sneaky coyote, we moved, slowly descending the slopes flattened nightly by the illicit weight of millions of other shadows who preceded us. The night, a legitimate chance at the American dream. What better way to attain it than by penetrating America by night? The stretch between Tijuana and San Diego is long, very long, and it is as treacherous as it is beautiful. It is unlikely that anybody who has ever crossed it will easily forget it. Its desert-like landscape is bound to carve itself equally onto body and soul. Once this turf is trodden, the tiredness, the awe, and the terror experienced along these trails become permanent memories. Some take away a cactus scratch that eventually scars. Others momentarily succumb to the sheer magnitude of the heavens, the number of stars, the depth of night. A few are left behind to join the landscape. This dark wonder, for many like myself, this arid world, these steep hills and deep valleys, provides us with our first hike ever. It is also our first view of such broad sky, our first communion with the infinite. It was probably under pristine and glittering skies like this that Immanuel Kant, bewildered, conceived his mystical dialectic between the starry heavens above and the moral law within. I, lacking all philosophical insight at the time, simply wanted to pause and contemplate this fragment of galaxy. But the coyote had other plans, and we kept pressing forward. Human industry adds its own accents to the native landscape. From the top of a hill, we watch a long line of people advancing hurriedly in the valley ahead of us. Some 200 years earlier, pushing westward in this very spot, they would have been considered pioneers. But the journey they have embarked on came too late, and they are not heading west, but north, and that alone is their disadvantage and their loss. Or, if they were in other latitudes and times, based on the determination and enthusiasm that fueled their march, one would be inclined to think of them as troops or pilgrims. But here, they're simply shadows. Suddenly, from a neighboring hill, a series of lights turns on simultaneously. Some come from trucks parked at ground level, others descend, flickering rapidly like a furious shower of shooting stars. For those unfortunate souls, this is as far as the American dream will go. Way up on top, we duck and hide. We wait. We descend again, and I am glad to hear the coyote say, "Ya estuvo, ya la hicimos." I hear him and feel relieved and sharing the collective enthusiasm. People say, "Órale," and "Chido," and "Ya chingamos." But I still don't understand how it is that we have actually made it. This valley looks as deserted as any other we have passed. Reaching the bottom of the next hill, the coyote takes out a flashlight and points it with his commanding right hand. And then I see it. The miracle of this Mexican Moses, who promises to deliver us from the jaguar's oppression, materializes in front of me. A dark circle opens up ahead, like a surreal toothless mouth, threatening to devour us. Had the other group made it this far, the migras would have never caught up with them. No migra will ever go down this pipe. Nobody with any human dignity would, so we leave ours behind. We enter the dark cylindrical hole, and I say to myself, so this is it. This is what it means to have made it. The pipe is about 5 feet in height. We dug and enter the filthy bowels of San Diego, where rodents make their home and humans are unwelcome invaders. The air inside is heavy and damp, and there is a pungent stench to it. I stretch my arms to the sides to find support on the inner walls of the pipe. My hands feel wet and sticky. I feel helpless. Amid the constant sound of shoes hitting the metal below, I sob quietly. Traveling in the same direction, narcotics on their way to give a high to those who vilify my journey are transported in a much more humane and sanitary fashion. The humiliation I experience is so deep, I promise myself that if I am ever caught, I will never try crossing again. Eventually, the darkness ends. We come out, and one by one, we all collapse on the ground. I feel exhausted and sick. My back hurts, and I wonder if I'll ever be able to stand straight up again. One of the main difficulties that one encounters when moving to a different country as an adult is learning the language. Once you're an adult, it's not the same as being a kid. You don't pick up the language the same way. That was the main challenge for me. One of the main challenges for me when I first came. I knew that I needed to learn the language. I just didn't know it was gonna be so difficult. One of the disadvantages of learning a language as an adult is that one's tongue has stiffened. The mastery of a new language requires an elastic tongue, a responsive tongue, and a lively tongue. And mine is now robotic and languid. At 20 years of age, when I began to study English, my vocal habits were already formed. The new prospect was exciting, but for a tongue accustomed to an ebb and flow from different depths, the twists and swirls of a new language were, and still are, overwhelming challenges. In my new language, my tongue stumbles. I utter screeching noises. No matter how much I might love the English language, its guttural sounds, the biting of the lower lip, the buzzing sound, the vibration of the tongue, the oral wealth that pours like honey out of others, all that has proven to be beyond my linguistic abilities. And the fact that I can complain about it in writing brings no consolation. So there's something to be known about the Mexican migrant that comes to the States is that we come with very low degrees of education. I was one of them. I've been very lucky to be able to go to college and grad school here in the States. But I came with a ninth degree education, ninth grade education, and which is actually pretty high for a Mexican migrant because most people who come here usually come with like sixth grade education. So uh, when I first started going to college in the States, to me it was just a different reality. A different universe was opening before me because in my family there was no history of anybody going even to high school. So it was something almost surreal, magical. Sitting in a classroom full of people, some 10 years my junior, I was immediately dazed, confused and blinded by the light of Plato's allegory. It was my first encounter with philosophy. I am like one of those people in the cave, I remember telling myself while sitting in my desk, mesmerized. I felt a metal ring pressing around my ankles and the weight of invisible chains binding me to the darkness. My bewilderment followed me for months outside the classroom, and it was such that while at work, I felt that my obligation as a thinking being was to question the motives of the cooks when they demanded that I hurry up with the plates. Ha! As though my quicker scrubbing would make any difference in the great scheme of things. Didn't they know that the essence of things was permanent and unchangeable? That motion is an impossibility because between one point and another, there's always a middle point, and from that middle point to another point, there are an infinite number of middle points. Tranquilos, I felt like saying, we're not gonna get anywhere. You're all being deceived by your senses. Or should I simply comply with their urgent request and remain aloof and unaffected? A different theory, that of Heraclitus, assured me that the person they were screaming at earlier and the one doing the thinking were two completely different people. I felt compelled to engage the cooks in Socratic dialogue, to try to prove whether the plates they demanded were actually what they thought them to be, or if they'd been living in a lie all along. Chained in the cave, they were being fooled by shadows. An idea like that would certainly confound them. But then, anticipating the reply, déjate de chingaderas y apúrate con esos pinches platos, cabrón. I dropped the pursuit of my philosophical inquiries and scrubbed the place harder. By going to college, I acquired a taste for a dimension of culture I never knew about before. Now, I have a special penchant for all things German, from the music of Telemann to the writings of Theodor Adorno. Also now, rather than going to rowdy weekend gatherings with relatives, I have come to appreciate the lonely and quiet times at home. Here, I pour myself a glass of Carmenere, I put some music on, and let the wine work its wonders. Tonight, Leonard Cohen has kept me company. A single song of his has been playing in an endless loop for more than an hour. I like to sit here and go over the highlighted passages of some texts I read in college. The Laws of Manu, the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Gita, the whole wisdom of ancient India flowing right here on my coffee table. Whenever my illegality gets particularly difficult, I pull these books down from the top shelf. These books provide me with comfort. They are excellent manuals on the virtues of humility and resignation. Some of their pages tell me that the contradictions and burdens and achievements and frustrations and everything else in life are only an illusion. And they must be, for after living through those pages for a while, I can muster the courage to ask questions like, what is so terrible about being undocumented? I then remember my mother, her happy sad eyes during our first video conference. I remember my younger brother's face, radiant with the promise of his upcoming college graduation, and the news I received about my youngest brother, his rise to rock stardom in our barrio. I remember the last time I saw them. The one was about 5 or 6 years old, the other no more than a toddler. The fact that they have a different father hasn't kept them from considering me their eldest brother, the absent brother, the one who lives on the other side, the one they occasionally talk to on the phone, the one who has seen them grow up through the pictures they kept sending him in the mail. The plight of the undocumented is no illusion. It is distance, clandestinity, criminalization, vulnerability, fear, lack of mobility, exclusion, uncertainty, humiliation. But the United States has an inherent aversion to stories having to do with impossibility and frustration and sadness, and won't allow them to take root on its turf. It is here that one of the most common platitudes uttered by politicians from either party about the issue of immigration acquires true significance. The US is a country of laws, but it is also a compassionate nation. And so, I might not be allowed to travel and be reunited with my family, but the US and its compassionate genius, its technological wonders, won't deny me their presence. When they miss their family, other people I know schedule a trip. A video chat. In spite of being undocumented for most of my life, really, I consider myself a very lucky individual. First of all, because I've been able to receive a wonderful education in the States, in the humanities out of all subjects. And, that actually allowed me to explore many different dimensions of culture, obviously, and also to reclaim my own language, which I began to lose when I started going to college and associating with other people. So after going to college and grad school, was able to get a job as a translator, and that was a job that I was able to keep for a number of years, and that's something that I wanna share with you now. The new head of human resources at work decided upon arriving that some order was needed in his new house. Within only a few weeks of getting the job, he cut loose the fine thread that had been holding Damocles' sword as a latent thread above my head. And as all things Greek, the blade was destined to fulfill its fate. One Thursday evening, it finally fell, and my head came rolling down the office where I've been working and hiding for the past 5 years. The email I received demanded that I clarify a problem with my social security number. It gave me only a few days. I had been dreading this day since I first got the job. I had imagined different scenarios, which varied from the truly civilized to the highly embarrassing. From an uncomfortable meeting in my manager's office to the abrupt arrival of the security guard behind my chair, ordering me to pack up my things and follow him outside immediately without offering any explanation as to why. But everything happened so quickly and was so impersonal that the only thing I could think of doing was to respond the same way. So, toward the end of the day, I prepared my letter of resignation, effective immediately. The following day, I turned it in and never went back to work again. By the time this book comes out, it will be more than 2 years since I lost my job. And during this time, I have often wondered how they see me, my superiors, what they think of me. In my resignation letter, I thanked them for their support and explained that I was leaving to start my own company. I suppose for them, My departure was as abrupt as it was puzzling. What kind of nonsense got hold of this guy? They probably wondered at the time. I had never missed one day of work during my 5 years of employment, so a decision like this, leaving a stable and well paying job where both colleagues and superiors had showed me nothing but respect, was way out of character for me, especially considering that my wife was pregnant at the time, that she had just taken a mortgage on our new house, and that I myself had my condo mortgage to pay. I was gambling my family's future to embark on an uncertain business venture. The next day, on Friday, I waited deliberately until everyone had left the office to avoid saying goodbye to my coworkers or having to offer any explanations about my rushed decision. I wanted to avoid sad faces and curious inquiries into or genuine concerns about my personal life. We had shared some good laughs at that office, and that was what I wanted to take with me. And my bosses, they had been exceptionally welcoming and supportive, always treated me fairly. 6 months earlier, they had seen me elated at my wedding, and now I couldn't get myself to look them straight in the face. Better to let them think of me as an ungrateful bastard than to reveal to them the reality that stigmatizes me. Better to disappoint them by leaving my job suddenly and without apologies than to implicate them in this mess I find myself in. Better to let them have an unfavorable opinion of me than to have them feel pity and helplessness in the face of my situation. My superiors, the earthly trinity whose names I must omit here, but to whom I am greatly indebted, both because of their professional support and their invaluable friendship. Thus, assaulted by feelings of guilt and failure, that Friday evening I took down the wedding pictures I had pinned on my cubicle and gathered my personal belongings. I printed the letter of resignation I had prepared the night before and went to my manager's office. There, I dropped it off, along with my pager, and my badge, and my keys, and everything that had made me a part of that organization, everything that I thought was mine. I looked around to see if anyone was still there, but everyone was gone for the weekend. I turned off the lights and looked back one last time. Everything was dark and quiet in the office. I had entered that company with the stealth of a thief, and like a thief, I left. As I mentioned, I've been living in Chicago for most of my life now. So my life has been really, it's been transformed through the years, almost, more than 2 decades. So I'm a completely different person from the one who crossed the border over 2 decades ago. I have been lucky enough to find my way into the social fabric of the US, and this is my satisfaction and my loss. The world I knew when I first came to the US has been turned on its head. The person I was has been completely transformed. Now, when I contemplate the adventure of the young immigrant breaking through the border almost 2 decades ago, he is almost unrecognizable. Such boldness, such confidence in the face of uncertainty. I think of him now and can't help but feel nostalgic. He is as ambitious as he is naive. His head full with pecuniary ideas. In more than one sense, he fits the profile of the typical Mexican immigrant perfectly. His education is minimal, and he comes from a socially disadvantaged family. Like most migrants, He is driven by earthly ambition and believes that mere access to the US, even if it means sneaking through his back door, to be the panacea for all his problems. He has no idea what the future has in store for him, going from one menial job to another, learning English, going to college, getting married, losing his job, and becoming a father are all things he can't imagine at the time of his translation. All he can think of is the endless night before him, the heavy legs, the promises that await him on the other side. So he runs and runs until he disappears into the darkness, into the long night of America. Thank you all for coming today.
So at this moment, we invite you with your questions. If you would please raise your hand, and Hannah in the back there will help me select a couple of people to come up to the mic and ask your question. Any questions? Ma'am, if you don't mind coming to the mic.
If I speak like this, is it loud enough?
Oh, I can repeat you. We do it for the video camera.
Would you advise others to follow your path?
Would you advise others to follow your path?
Yeah.
Oh.
My path meaning
To leave Mexico the way you did, even if it means entering America illegally and doing what you did.
right. When I first came to the States, I didn't know what was awaiting me. I didn't know what I was looking for, except that I needed to be able to find a job. That's what I was looking for when I first came to the States. And I think people will continue to go to places where they can find a better way to make, to have a better living. Like we see the crisis right now in Europe. I don't know that I can give any advice to anybody, if they should come or they should stay. I think when it comes to Mexico, I think immigration has actually stopped from Mexico. People are not coming from Mexico anymore because, one, for the economic crisis that started in 2009, and two, so it's too dangerous to cross the border anymore. It's not the same that it used to be. So I'm not sure that I will advise people to come, but people do. In fact, the trend has actually reversed. There are more Americans going to Mexico now than Mexicans going to coming to the States. But it's completely different. It's not the same whatsoever. I mean, I don't know if you are an American citizen or not. I assume you are, but you will never have the problems that we have. Ever. Just by virtue of having an American passport, you will never have the problems that we face as Mexicans, or as citizens of other countries like Central America and such. So my advice, I don't know how to advise people on this, but if they can stay and go to school, my brother has gone on to college in Mexico. He doesn't need to come. He doesn't want to come. Maybe he'll come and to travel and vacation here, but he doesn't need to come anymore.
Now that you have your kids, what do you tell your children about immigration overall in that experience?
I have one daughter. She's 4 years old, and I still don't know what to tell her. I mean, this is a difficult issue for me to talk about, and I come here because I want to be able to start a dialogue with people. For her, I think she's starting to realize that there's a problem, because she's been to Mexico twice and I haven't. She went there to meet my mom, and my wife went with her. I can't go. I mean, I can, but I'm not. I won't be able to come back if I did. So that is a question that I am all often thinking about, and I still don't know what I will say, other than I mean, there are some really bad laws in this world that need to change, and people need to get engaged and realize that it affects the lives of people. So I mean, I do want her to be aware that there are some injustices in the world, but I mean, it is such a complex issue. Immigration is that to be able to explain that to a child, I don't know if it's fair or if I should do it or not. So that is something that I still don't have an answer to.
Have you tried to become a citizen? And I gather they could find you if they wanted to, so they must be leaving you alone.
Yeah, there's an excellent question because many people. Should I repeat the question? I'm
If you
sorry.
don't mind.
Okay, so the lady back there was just asking if I have tried to become a citizen, and you know, it is an excellent question because there are many misconceptions about becoming a citizen or standing in line to get your visa the way people should. That's why many people despise us because they see us as lawbreakers, as people who are lazy to follow the legal process to be able to migrate to the States. When you come from a background like mine, all those options are off the table. You have no option of getting a visa because if you do want to get one, if you manage to save enough to pay for the application fee, which is like $200 or so, and I don't think you get it back. And keep in mind that in order for you to save $200 in a place like Mexico, you have to work like I don't know how long, maybe 6, 7 months, a year. I don't know. That you have to work a long time, but first you have to show that you have property, that you have a stable job, well-paying job, that you have family ties. So they make it impossible for people from a working class background to be able to get a visa. That's the first thing. So they actually want middle class people to be applying for visas. And becoming a citizen once you're here is practically impossible for people like me who cross without a visa. If I had come with a visa from Mexico and I had overstayed it, there will be a way for me not to become a citizen because that takes like 20, 30 years, whatever. I don't know how long. But it is impossible for me having crossed without inspection in order to come here and kneel in your bathroom and scrub your toilets or clean your dishes. It is impossible for me to do that because the law prohibits it. And that is what President Obama, after deporting over 2 million people, tried to correct with his executive action. Obviously, he's not going to pass. It's caught up in the court system. So that will be the only way for a person like me to be able to fix my situation. And yes, they do know who I am and where I live because the government is complicit in all this. The immigration system and the economic system of the U.S. is designed in such a way so that people like me exist. So that we come here and do the kind of jobs that other people won't do for $6 or $7 an hour. So I don't know if that answers your question.
How were you able to afford college? Because most colleges don't give scholarships or loans to undocumented people. So how did that work out? Which is great.
So the question now is how I was able to afford going to college. I worked full time and went to school full time. I knew from the very beginning that, I think most of us who are in a situation similar to mine know that we have to work twice as hard or even more, in order for us to be able to achieve what you achieve, or even less, a lot less. So I knew that I had to work extra hard. I paid my way through college.
You don't consider yourself officially a citizen, but that's the theme of this program. But I expect that you really do think yourself as a citizen in some other ways. Could you consider what that might mean?
The gentleman here says that obviously I'm not a citizen, whether or not I consider myself a citizen in some other ways. Uh, well, I consider myself, obviously, I mean, I'm an author who happens to be undocumented. But that doesn't mean that being undocumented, I can make a political statement. And I think this is it. This is my citizenship. This is the way of making my voice heard, and claiming, if not saying that even if I don't have political rights, I can make a political statement, and that's as far as I can. As I can go with citizenship, because I really have no protections whatsoever from this government or from my government in Mexico, which is, despicable, to say the least.
You're a citizen of the world.
I wish I am a citizen of the world, I guess, but with no protections. Yes. Oh yeah.
First of all, thank you for sharing your story. Very moving, very meaningful, and I think what this country has achieved is because of immigration. And I'm just wondering, if you were a novelist rather than somebody who was writing fiction, nonfiction, how would the next chapters play out in your mind?
So the question is that if I were a novelist rather than a nonfiction writer, how will the next chapters of my story will play out? I don't know. I really don't know. It all depends on what happens with immigration reform, I guess. And quite honestly, as I said, I am an author who happens to be undocumented. And they invited me here today, but I really wish I'd be speaking about Jack London or Dante or Dostoevsky or Shakespeare or Borges. Those are the kinds of themes I want to be talking about, not so much immigration. I mean, I do this because I'm here to defend my own dignity, my own humanity and that of others as well. But I don't know how other chapters will play out. We'll have to wait and see. Sir.
Is your wife a U.S. citizen? She's able to go back and forth to Mexico.
Yeah, she is a U.S. citizen. Her family has been here for over 150 years, I think. She is able to come back and forth to Mexico. Yeah.
If she's a citizen, she could apply for you.
Well, the question here is whether or not my wife, who is an American citizen, could apply for a visa for me. That's exactly the question that I was answering earlier. That is the problem that President Obama was trying to correct with his executive action, because people like myself, who are parents of American citizens or are married to American citizens, cannot fix our situation because we came here without inspection. Okay? One of you. Yeah, sure.
Make it easier for this camera. Okay, I have a question about writing.
Okay.
Yeah. The prose is so detailed and so in your head, and I'm just wondering, is this always something you've done? Have you kept a journal your entire life, or how did you get into writing nonfiction, or being interested in Borges and all that kind of stuff? Did you follow?
Right. So before writing this book, I started writing in Spanish a little bit. It is difficult with me because it's been so hard having left school at 13 years old and then starting college in a different country, in a different language. So my thought process, I first learned how to write about complex issues in English and then in Spanish. After I graduated from college, I went back and did a master's in Latin American literature. So that's where I started knowing more about language and all that. So, and it's funny that you should mention whether or not I have kept a journal of all of my life. No, I haven't. But this book actually started as a journal. I started writing this book when I first got my job as a translator because I was moving into a different circle. I was moving into the middle class of the US, and the people that I started relating to were nothing like me at all. One of the questions they used to ask me all the time. So Jose, what are you doing this summer? Where are you gonna go? I'm like, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to go somewhere. I didn't know. I work. So I'm like, nowhere. But then the next year came. I'm like, so this year are you gonna go somewhere? I'm like, oh, so this is something important that people do. So I started thinking about this idea of how I was so different from them, how I didn't share that experience, because they will come and talk to me about their plans of going to Rome and Italy and London and whatnot. Sometimes even during winter, during like January or February, they will come and, hey, Jose, I was just at Puerto Vallarta this week. And I'm like, that's nice. That's 2 hour drive from 2 hour drive from Guadalajara, where I'm from, and I didn't have the possibility of going there. So in order for me to be able to deal with all of that, because I wasn't able to relate with them really, they will invite me to go and have a drink with them, and I couldn't. I instead of having a state ID, I had my Mexican matricula, and if I went into a bar with them and showed my matricula, they will immediately know. For those of you who don't know what a matricula is, it's the consular ID that identifies you immediately as being Mexican and therefore being undocumented, because otherwise you won't have any reason to have one. So it is basically our David star, our Star of David. If you show that you're saying I'm undocumented, this is where I am. So that's why I didn't go with them. I wouldn't even go out. So my only way to socialize with my coworkers was when they had me over at their place or I had them over. So in order for me to deal with all that, I had moved to a different place. I lived on the north side of the city, whereas I used to live in the south suburbs. So in order for me to be able to relate, or rather to deal with all the pressure of not being part of this new circle that I was becoming a part of, was to go home and to write about my experience every day. That's the way that I dealt with it. And after couple of years, 2 or 3 years, I went back to my journal and noticed that there were certain themes that I was exploring, and I kept coming back to, and that's the origin of this book. Yes. Oh. Yes. 1 second. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm curious as to how you would compare your journey to other undocumented citizens who are from other parts of the world. So how you kind of frame your experience versus someone who's undocumented, let's say from Poland or Ireland or from another country that's not as politically charged.
Right. So the question is how I could compare my being undocumented from Mexico. How do I compare that to people who are undocumented from other countries in the world, like Poland or Ireland? I think being undocumented is one and the same thing, whether you are from Poland, from Ireland, or from any other country in the world, because the problem that we have here is one and the same. You have no rights. You can't go back home. You can't be reunited with your family. People talk badly of you even though you are serving them. I think it's pretty much the same. I haven't found someone who will say, you know what, my situation is different because I'm from Palestine, for instance. Or maybe it is different and I just don't know about it. But to me, what I share with people from other places in the world is this life in limbo. The uncertainty of being undocumented, of being deportable, of being subject to all of these things that I've been talking about today. So that is what I shared with them, this kind of nether existence. So that's how I will say that I compare their life in the U.S. with mine. Does that answer your question? Okay. Somebody had another question here.
Okay, so Danny, you'll be our last question for that.
Okay.
I do want to remind you all that there are also books in the back available for purchase.
Thank you for sharing some of your writings. My question is, just listening to that part about you sitting down, listening to music, and looking at your favorite authors, and that somehow like grounding you. Did you always feel that you were going to be a writer, or what is a little bit of your journey that brought you to look at yourself as an to know that deep down inside that this is what you fundamentally were, you know, like that you loved writing, that you were going to be an author, and I think what kind of authors, you mentioned some of them, but did it help to read and read and read and connect with these authors that somehow brought you to write?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. I never knew I was gonna be an author, and I never imagined that in my life. I grew up in a house with no books in Mexico. As I said, the level of education of most of my family in Mexico is pretty low. It used to be. Now people are going on to college, but so I grew up in a house where we had only two books. There was an atlas that was kept on our coffee table. And it was a beautiful book with beautiful illustrations and histories of different places. And it was a book that taught me very important lessons since an early age. And it taught me that there were beautiful and distant places in the world that I will never be able to travel to because of where I came from. And the other book was our important book. And it was so important, in fact, that it was kept behind a glass cabinet, and nobody ever approached it, except for my grandmother, who came out and opened it. It was our Bible. She opened it every week or two in order for her to dust it, make sure it was nice and neat. But that was the extent of my relationship with books until I came to the States and I actually went to college when I was about 28 or so. But when I started going to college, that's when I discovered this alternate universe that I never knew about before, and that was the universe of letters and literature and all this dimension of culture that I was unfamiliar with until I started, digging into those books and thinking, where have I been all of my life? This is really awesome. And I wanted to keep exploring that world. And what happened was that, my social life became practically non-existent, because I worked full-time, I went to school full-time, and the rest of the time I just wanted to keep reading, because that was so important for me, because I felt that I had missed out on all of this for so many years that I wanted to make up for it. So that's how I became familiar with that. And then, I started having that curiosity. Maybe one day I can tell my own story as well. That's how it all started. Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it.